Hello, my name is Kate Ham, and I'm the Virtual Advocacy Chair of the League of Women Voters, Wichita Metro. I'm so excited for you all to be here tonight watching with us about as we learn about youth criminal justice and how it impacts you and our communities. There are a lot of really great people that will speak tonight and a lot of really great information. So I just want to give you a couple of things to think about as we start our evening. One, if you are in need of subtitles, and this is also will be put into the comments there. So if you do know someone that needs subtitles, go ahead and click the CC button down at the bottom, and I will also put this in the comments as well. Also, this video will be available after tonight's meeting, so it can be shared or rewatched. If you have any moment where you're curious or you have more, or if you have questions about anything, feel free to check it out, check out the conversation. As well as we will have really great conversation throughout the entire evening. So with that, go ahead and put any comments or questions into the chat at any time, and we'll pull that up as we go through the evening with those questions. Thank you so much for attending tonight, and I'm really excited to have you here. I wanted to give you a couple of updates about what is going on in the league to start us off, and then I'll also end with that as well. This coming December, we are hosting a wine tasting fundraiser. It is on December 17th, which is a Friday, at 7:00 p.m. at the Old Cowtown Museum. Go ahead and check out our Facebook for more information of how to purchase tickets. There will also be silent auction items as well, and so it will be a pretty fun event. Well, I wanted to thank you all for being here again, but I wanted to give you one little piece of background on why we are looking at youth criminal justice. Some things that I'm really excited for tonight. As the state of Kansas's League of Women Voters, so that means not the Wichita Metro portion, but the larger level for the whole state of Kansas, is reassessing and investigating to look at our stance on youth criminal justice and making sure that we're looking into what our stance has been and where all of youth criminal justice is today to understand it better. That way, if we need to do an update onto that stance, we have great information. So we want you as our members to be very educated on this topic, so that way when it comes time for us to investigate more, you are ready and understanding a lot more about this topic. We'll be discussing it more as we go through our unit meetings in January and February, so keep on the lookout for those meetings. You do need to be a member to be able to vote and be able to have some further discussion on the state of the League of Women Voters Kansas stance on youth criminal justice. So go ahead and join and pay your dues today to make sure that you are able to talk about this topic with us. I'm really excited tonight to be able to have two awesome people speak on youth criminal justice. The first gentleman that we're going to be hearing from tonight is Mike from Kansas Appleseed. A little background on Kansas Appleseed. Their mission is to have a statewide advocacy organization dedicated to the belief that Kansas working together can build a more thriving, inclusive, and just Kansas. So I'm very excited to bring Mike on. Hello, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'd love for our members just to hear a little bit more about Kansas Appleseed and be able to hear your work, the work that you all do in youth criminal justice.
Definitely. So Kansas Appleseed, like you said, believes that, Kansans working together can build more thriving, inclusive, and just communities. So that's kind of how we structure our work. We divide our work into three kind of distinct campaigns: our thriving campaign, inclusive campaign, and the just campaign. So I'm the just campaign director, and that means all of our work on criminal justice related issues, youth justice, as well as child welfare system work. It kind of falls on my plate. So we do work in all those areas. And then in our thriving campaign, we work a lot on hunger issues, food access, housing instability. And then in our inclusive campaign, we talk about civic engagement, whether that be some of the work we've done on the census, increasing rural voter turnout, all sorts of good stuff. So we're kind of all over the map, but we are all over the state. We are a statewide advocacy organization. And so we really try to have our hands in lots of issues and have folks all over the state working on different stuff. But excited to talk youth justice with this group while I've got a few minutes with you. And so Appleseed has been in the youth justice space since maybe 2013, 2014, really before the big push that eventually led to the big reform effort in 2016, what many folks still know as Senate Bill 367, which was a fairly comprehensive reform of the youth justice system aimed at reducing our over-reliance on detention and out-of-home placements. So we were, at that time, I think the 5th highest per capita user for youth incarceration or out-of-home placement. And that was obviously troubling for a lot of reasons. It's very expensive and it's not very effective, not very good for the kids. So we got involved in that effort and brought people together, had lots of conversations around this issue, and eventually saw that big reform package pass in 2016. And then I come onto the scene. I wasn't part of any of that. I just know the organizational background. So 2017 is when I joined the organization and started out really focused on shepherding that legislation through implementation. It was a staged implementation, happened over multiple years. So essentially every July, a new piece would come into effect. And we had to make sure that it was working as planned, that folks that wanted to do things the old way didn't, roll things back, and that the money associated with reinvesting into community-based alternatives to detention actually got to where it needed to go. And that's all still a work in progress. And so there's lots to talk about there, and would be really happy to engage with this group deeper in conversations about that stuff. But we're still working on all these issues, and we're identifying new priorities all the time. And so as we move to 2022, we have identified a list of youth justice specific priorities. And part of that is the reinvestment money that I was speaking about earlier. So for many years, we did a very, very good job of making sure that money stayed where it was supposed to be and remained dedicated to youth justice spending. Last year, there were a lot of budget questions, and unfortunately, the legislature and the governor signed off on taking $21 million out of that account. So that was really disappointing to see. But the budget has ended up being a lot better than folks anticipated. And so there's been a really strong effort already to get that money placed back where it rightfully belongs and rededicated to spending on youth justice improvements. So that's really great to see. Obviously, nothing's a done deal yet, but the Joint Committee on Juvenile Justice Corrections and Juvenile Justice Oversight made a recommendation that the legislature will restore that money, and are even taking the extra step to draft legislation to introduce in the legislature. So that's a pretty strong recommendation from that group. So that's number one priority, is to make sure that money stays dedicated to these improvements, because if we don't have the money follow through, we're not going to get the true continuum of care that is the idea of all this. Is that we believe that the youth justice system is one that should really help kids, right? Kids deserve positive interventions, not just punitive interventions, right? And so that really informs our belief. And science shows us, data shows us, that kids are most often best served with the lightest touch possible and the closest to home resources available. If you can keep kids in your community, you're going to have good results. And so that's what we're really aiming at with the whole Senate Bill 367 reform. And as we continue to work on these issues, if we make sure that money stays where it needs to be, it can actually flow to communities to make sure we realize this big vision. So that's priority number one. Priority number two for us, I guess these aren't in any real order, they're just on the list. but would be working to eliminate fines and fees for justice-involved youth. Um, we had some provisions in that big reform package that said that you can't keep kids, on their probation for longer because they don't pay. You can't incarcerate them because they don't pay, those are good steps. But given the scope of those fines and fees, for a state budget, you're talking a pretty small amount of money. For an individual kid or family, it's a really meaningful and sometimes too much to pay. And so I think given the scope on a state budget scale, we can find other ways to pay for those wherever those fees go and whatever they pay for, and eliminate the financial barriers to success that still inhibit some of our young people from being successful. And so we're working on a bill with the folks from Progeny and a bunch of other organizations. The Juvenile Law Center is helping to lead that effort as well, and are working on a bill that would eliminate those fines and fees and allow those good services and programs to still get the funding that they need to function, but essentially not require the kids or their families to be the ones that are funding those kind of things. They can, if you're justice involved, your accountability is your completing of your terms, whatever programs you have to do, whatever meetings you have to go to, or tests you have to submit. That's your accountability. The fine and fee isn't an effective accountability tool for a child. So we'd like to see those eliminated. And then the third big priority in the youth justice space for us this year is ending, or I should probably more accurately say, significantly, dramatically reducing the use of shackling in courtroom settings for children. There are actually no laws on the books in Kansas about when you should or should not restrain a child in a courtroom. There are rules regarding when you cuff and don't cuff adults in courtrooms, but there are actually no rules on the book. There are some local court rules, etc., but 33 other states have dramatically limited this practice through legislation or judicial rule. Most of those states have undertaken that effort in the last 10 years, so it's a very salient topic. And fundamentally, there is generally no good reason for most children to be restrained in a courtroom setting. The bill that we would propose would still allow for it if the state did go through the process to show cause for that, but it would place the burden on the state to go through that process. In the vast majority of cases, as you see in other states, they don't request that process. So you've got a child that's not shackled in court, and there's traumatic effects associated with that. There's a chilling effect, whether you're dealing with public opinion, even the unconscious bias of others in the courtroom, judges, and then there's the impact on your ability to truly participate in your own defense. If you are secured in a way that you can't read or write, how can you truly communicate in a courtroom setting with your attorney? And so there's a lot of negative effects with that. And we would just like to see Kansas get in line with the 33 other jurisdictions that have already done it. And we took a lot of the pieces from there and put together a model bill. But I will also say that same joint committee that I mentioned authoring legislation on the 21 million is also has made this recommendation and is authoring legislation on the child shackling. So big time recommendations from that group as well. So I think I'm probably getting close to my time here, but those are the three big things that we're working on, as well as just making sure that Kansas stays the course and realizes that the reform effort that we are in the midst of still is very important for our young people. Like I said, they deserve positive interventions. Kids in the justice system need to be helped in learning, growing, healing, not punished. And that's what we're working on. And that's what the data shows. And if we can all get on board with this and use the resources we've got, plus there's some federal pools of money that could do a lot for us, we can make big changes and big impacts here. And every kid that benefits from this kind of work that we're doing on the back end is a happy, healthy, productive Kansan that we all reap the benefit of that in our towns, cities, societies across the state. So excited to talk about it with you all, and excited to get to the point where we can have some questions and do all that as well.
Thank you so much. I mean, I've learned a ton in just like and what you're sharing, and things that I didn't realize, some parts of youth criminal justice and how legally where things are differently than where adults. So anybody 18 plus really has some differences there. So that's incredible. The work that you guys are doing is absolutely incredible, and we are so excited that you are here. So I'm going to pull you backstage for a second, and don't worry, Mike will be back. Just a bit. So next, I'm going to bring up Tyler Miller from Progeny. I'm very excited to have Progeny with us today, as their whole goal is a youth-adult partnership focused on reimagining the juvenile justice system and reinvest into community-based alternatives. So really kind of bringing back that, kind of what Mike was saying about that, back to close to home. So I'm super excited to bring on Tyler. Tyler, hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm so excited for you to share more about Progeny, your story, and everything in between, for us to really understand what your guys' work is in the youth criminal justice system.
Yeah, so as you have stated before, my name is Tyler and I'm with Progeny. I joined Progeny in its developing stages. We were originally a group of late teens and early 20-year-olds who had direct lived experience in the Kansas juvenile system. Each of us had our own different lived experiences, but we all came back to a single problem, which was how Kansas handled our youth. And so our very first campaign, with steady research and community involvement, was the Invest, Don't Arrest Kansas campaign. And so what the Invest, Don't Arrest Kansas campaign focused on was building on the legacy of Senate Bill 367 and closing the last youth facility and investing in prevention, community-based services, and ending pipelines to incarceration for youth. And so we had several reports, including one of them that we built around vision sessions with directly impacted youth to see what services and programs they need in their communities to thrive. We also recently put together a report on the Senate Bill 367 5-year anniversary to look at the outlining the pros, the shortcomings in services, as well as a blueprint report on ways to improve the next session by involving youth in these conversations as well. Because one of the things with Progeny is we believe you cannot have a conversation about the future without the future. So we want to get youth involved. We want to have the directly impacted in these conversations to actually build tangible and useful plans for youth in Kansas. The other campaigns that we have, Mike has touched briefly on, with the sweeping of the $20 million out of the Senate Bill 367 reinvestment funds. We partnered with Kansas Appleseed and a couple of other organizations and started having conversations with representatives, legislators, as well as committees around what it looks like to return the funds and make it more accessible for communities to reach to actually implement and use the funds. Last but certainly not least, we have our Debt-Free Kansas campaign. We are partnering with several other organizations as well around eliminating fines and fees for youth in the juvenile justice system. We have crafted a bill with our partners and are having regular virtual coffees, as we call them, with legislators, representatives, and committees. And we have given presentations to our local Juvenile Justice Corrections Advisory Board, the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee, and the Kansas Advisory Group for Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And as previously stated before, this would look to eliminate fines and fees for youth in the juvenile justice system. And so, yeah, and that's a little bit about the work, a little bit about a history of Progeny. And so, yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This is awesome. I think we have two really awesome opportunities, two great groups of people that are working really hard to love on our youth and make sure that they are really prepared and ready for our future and in that youth criminal justice system. So I'm going to bring Mike back up too. So we've got all three of us up here. And we have some questions rolling in. And so also, if you are here and you want to, you're curious about anything, go ahead and drop those questions into the comment box on either YouTube or Facebook, and we'll pull those up. But I just had kind of a quick off the bat question that I think would be really helpful is what areas of criminal justice, like when we think of criminal justice as a whole, like what areas are kind of unique to youth that maybe we don't think about when we might not think about when we talk about adult criminal justice, like a more generalized criminal justice? What are some things that are more specifically things that we need to think about when it comes to our youth?
I think that's a really good question, and I'll start. I mean, but we'll definitely be curious what Tyler has to say on this. I think, for me, there are so many things that are like very much linked, right? If you have kids that are experiencing trauma, adverse childhood experiences, not only do you see them potentially end up in the justice system as children, but later on as adults as well. But I think from my perspective, navigating, and again, this is true of adults too, but navigating like child-parent relationships is a big part of the youth justice system that I think is something that's a little bit unique. And then, of course, navigating, educational success for young people, making sure that kids are still completing their high school class, on track to graduate, all that stuff. I think that makes things pretty unique in those couple elements for sure.
Definitely. Tyler, what are your thoughts?
So yeah, I would definitely say a few of the big things that I've seen that are specifically unique with youth is around the foster care system. Mm-hmm. So we've seen multiple times where there are not necessarily placements for youth, or they're bounced around from different housing placements and end up into the juvenile justice system through pretty much a back door. I think that's one of the more specific ones that we've noticed in Kansas, and also talks around like status offenses, school to prison pipeline, stuff like that. I feel like are the major key factors when it comes to dealing with youth that end up in the system.
Definitely. I know there's speaking of the school, I've kind of heard school or preschool to prison pipeline. Like, what are things that we can, so sorry, it got pulled away a little quick early. How can our school districts, communities, even us, like, just me as an individual, help to change systems, to change youth criminal justice? Or is it not systems? Like, how can we as people, if maybe systems aren't a thing to do yet, what are ways that we can assist with something of that nature? And either of you can go first. You
Sure.
are, I was like, you both have probably a lot of understanding and just, or better ways to describe it even better than I can.
Tyler, do you want to jump in on this one first?
Sure. I mean, there's multiple different things that come to mind. One of them I've heard of, there's different restorative-based practices that have been seen to be very helpful in schools. As far as getting involved, I feel like parents should be involved with their children and be involved with school board conversations and just see what you can do to help mitigate problems that may arise with school.
Yeah. On the restorative part, definitely. I've seen lots of local communities get really invested in restorative justice and making sure their communities are restorative communities. And so that, restorative justice can be part of the youth justice system. It can be part of the school system. There's a lot of use. I mean, it can be part of the adult criminal justice system as well. And so I think that's a big one. Another thing I'd highlight is part of that reform effort of 2016 was that every school district has to have essentially a memorandum of understanding with local law enforcement officials. And so each school district has one of those. And that's a direct place that community members could engage their school boards to make sure that they look at those on a annual basis, and make sure they get renewed and updated, and that we can continue to have those conversations in an ongoing way that allows us to learn more, understand community needs, et cetera. And so I think that's a really good way to get involved locally, for sure.
That's awesome. We have a woman that asked, are you looking at ways, we talked a little bit about foster care and how important, as one piece, and how important like having a guardian or a parent or like a kind of a more of a parental role figure as a part of the criminal justice system in ways to improve upon that for the child. Are you looking at ways to make the family whole, like working with the entire family to prevent youth from going into the foster care or juvenile facilities? Just kind of what work is being done in that area, maybe on the family side?
Yeah, that is certainly part of this, right? And there have already been several different programs rolled out, whether that's, pilot status or full-blown status, depends on where you're at. But there have certainly been investments made already, and will continue to be more, that are related to, parent education classes. I mean, parent-child relationship engagement of a variety of natures, as well as, special involvement or special investments in making sure that families really understand the justice system process and what is happening at each stage and where they can be involved and have active roles. And so, yeah, I think that is part of it. I think that is absolutely an area that we can do more as well. So.
Very cool. Tyler, what are your thoughts? I know you talked a little bit about this when you were talking about it being a unique piece of the youth criminal justice world.
I mean, a lot of it Mike definitely said. I definitely feel like when it comes to system-involved youth, we need to not only make sure that the parents are kept in depth, but to also have them also help the youth with their case, with their system involvement. And I feel like that's one of the things that is held up whenever you're a child of the foster care system. Your paperwork gets lost. Your case managers are handling several caseloads at once. So it can be a giant mix-up. So I guess keeping adults accountable for youth and just supporting in those ways, but whatever that means as far as programming and parent rental help.
And I think, and we might have some parents or people that are in helping youth that are in foster care systems or in placement systems for just needed spaces. And so that's some really great advice, is making sure that you are involved and that you are understanding, working to understand, and that you are kind of keeping everybody on their toes and everybody abreast to what is, going on, so that there isn't mix-ups and things. I think that's some really great advice. We have somebody else that asked a question, or it's going to take a turn. So it's talking about fines and fees, different than restorative costs. For example, youth destroyed property, and then the cost of restoration. Because there might be some confusion around what is a fine or fee, and then what is restorative cost, and how do those work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's being referred to, traditionally known as restitution, right? What gets paid back for damaged property or some sort of damage. That is not part of the fine and fee conversation that we're currently having. It is part of like the larger fine and fee conversation, but currently the bill that we are working on with this coalition does not impact that. So it wouldn't change the issuing of restitution. What I will say on that subject, though, just because there is some merit to figuring out what is right. You can damage it is an interesting one, because you've generally, not always, but generally you have insurance companies that come into the mix. And so, insurance has already paid for a bunch of stuff, but you're still asking the kids to pay for it. There is absolutely an accountability piece there, but it's certainly worth more conversation to see what that looks like right now in Kansas. We haven't really studied that. Are we doing it right? Is it being effective? Because obviously we want to hold kids accountable for that kind of thing. But we also probably don't want those things to, adversely impact their lives beyond a certain point. But that's not part of the bill that we're working right now.
Awesome. Well, Tyler, I have a question for you that somebody else brought up. Is like, what's the average amount of debt for a youth in the juvenile justice system? Are we talking, like, where are we on the scale? Are we in tens of dollars, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands? What does that look like for somebody in the justice system, Tyler?
So I know it varies with case, especially the charges and whatnot. For someone like myself, all in all, my court's total fines were like $1,064. That's also including like $800 to take me from Oklahoma City to Junction City. So like I said, it all varies. And yeah, I'd say so. I've seen anywhere as cheap as like $150, and they just charge for the attorney fees, all the way up to a couple of grand for if it was like a theft charge or something like that.
Awesome. Mike, any other insight that you have too?
Yeah, it can widely vary. There are some counties that try to charge parents and families, kids, for attorney costs. Others do a better job of handling that through county coffers. But I will say, that is part of the effort that we're working on with this coalition. It has been very difficult to put all that data together. Kansas does not do a great job of tracking that in sort of one succinct way. So we've had data requests to the Office of Judicial Administration, Treasurer's Office, local judicial districts, all sorts of folks trying to figure out what the fine and fee picture really looks like. And like Tyler said, it really varies. But what I will say is I think we're close to synthesizing all of that data and being able to produce kind of a fact sheet with what we've learned from that information that hopefully will get us closer to being able to answer that average debt question with like a 1 second answer instead of a 2-minute answer.
I think that's great that you're trying to figure out like what does this look like? Because I think that's a big piece that sometimes we forget about the criminal justice system in general. Is you've got cities, counties, states, you've got different jurisdictions, there is a lot of moving pieces that it depends on what's that intersection for everybody in that moment, because you could be at one portion of a jurisdiction within a city that has different things that how that court system works than compared to another, if you're in a larger area compared to a smaller area. And so I think that's a great call out there too, and why the point that you both made of we think we have a decent idea, but we're not 100% sure because there's so many moving pieces in it. And I think that brings back to that point that you both made earlier of staying involved. If you have a youth that you care about that's in a case, staying involved because of how many moving pieces there are in the criminal justice system in general, but especially when you're a youth and you're trying to figure out who you are in general, as well as how do the courts work. Like that's a lot to figure out in a short amount of time. I have somebody else. So Beth asked another question that I just thought was a really great question. And then I have some other ones that just popped in as well. She just is interested in, is there any kind of trauma-informed training that happens in the juvenile justice system? Anything where like people are trained to understand how a youth, child to, kind of a teenager had a trauma-filled event and training with that there.
Yeah, so there's definitely trauma-informed training. Again, I think it's an area that we've seen, growth through this reform effort, recognizing the need for trauma-informed care, trauma-informed treatment. But definitely, again, an area that we can continue to do better, making sure that all levels of the system are trained. There's being trained in trauma-informed care, and there's truly implementing trauma-informed practices, right? So there's a lot left to that conversation, but it is something that I know I've definitely heard of in lots of rooms as we talk about youth justice, but something that we can continue to do better with. And I'm curious to see what Tyler has to say as well.
Yeah, I was going to say I've seen some implementation, and especially whenever I was in facility. Nothing like overly done, like it wasn't taught to like all the staff, but there was a handful of staff that got regular training on the trauma training and special case training for like some of the mental needs youth and some of the more riled up youth, special training for, restraint situations, stuff like that. But it wasn't necessarily like a wide thing. So I think there could be definitely more expansion on it. But they are starting to make a little bit of improvements.
Well, and not to interrupt, but I think, recognizing it's really important, because when you do look at the youth justice population, so many young people in that system come with trauma. I would say vast majority come with trauma. And that's why, like I said earlier, children deserve positive interventions if we're finding them involved in the youth justice system, because there's a lot there. It's not just they're a bad kid. There's a lot to each kid's story.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I have a kind of it's going to kind of pull us back to where we were in a conversation earlier. You both talked about committees that the state legislature has on youth criminal justice. And so we have someone, Joan is just curious. She's like, are these committees bipartisan? Like, what does that look like? And do you have like, how can we get involved and help with your lobbying? Like, how can we assist in your guys' missions and with these bills with our legislature? Because a lot of as you guys know with us, like we really want our members and everybody to be advocates for things that they're passionate about.
Yeah. So the Joint Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice Oversight is absolutely a bipartisan legislative committee made up of members from both the Senate and the House. So that one is bipartisan. Some other relevant committees would be, I guess, the Child Welfare Oversight Committee is also a bipartisan committee. The Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee is not only bipartisan, but also made up of a bunch of different system stakeholders. There's defense attorney, KDOC officials, DCF officials, governor appointees, youth members, CAG members, all sorts of folks. So yeah, bipartisan groups for sure. And then in terms of getting involved in lobbying, always can sign up for updates through the KansasAppleseed.org website to get on our list. We blast out emails during the session all the time to let folks know what's going on and who to call, or the links to just call your own folks. And so that's one way. We are also in the midst of planning some like lobby days specifically where we get folks into action. With COVID, we haven't done those in the last couple of years. Just because bringing a bunch of people to Topeka to all huddle together was probably not the smartest thing. But we're feeling better now with the way things are going. And we are talking about having some lobby days coming up for the 2022 session. So nothing planned yet that I can, specifically advertise, but those are two good ways. Just get on the lists and stay involved. And when, obviously it is the people's house, right? Like you're welcome to go to the Capitol anytime and sign up to talk to your legislators and others. But it's definitely more fun when you get to do it with a bunch of friends. So.
And I'm going to put into the comments here, and then I also will put Progenies in here as well as just ways to get involved. But Tyler, tell us about with Progeny. I know I was like, I'll put it in the link there, but tell us more about ways to get, to be able to help you guys in your lobbying efforts.
So yeah, we do a lot of our posting on Facebook. I believe we have a Twitter as well. A lot of our information we're putting on there, so feel free to follow us on there. We do have an email list that we are putting together of different people in the community. So if you are interested, we have the Progeny website as well. Feel free to fill out the information form and we can connect with you.
Awesome. All right. So moving back to some more hard-hitting topics. So this is an interesting question from Martha. So do you see public/private partnerships beneficial to addressing the risk factors affecting the youth in our community? So let's say, it could be a public effort, maybe through mental health organizations that are state or community affiliated, or private partnerships in other ways that are privatized organizations and nonprofits. So do you see this as being a great way for us to help our youth? Or share with us some partnerships that work, or share with us a little bit around like kind of how that dynamic works.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question. And I think it's one that we could probably talk for the full hour about. So I think just some of my general thoughts would be, to me, seeing public-private partnerships in this space, in communities, means that there's buy-in, that there's community involvement, right? So I think that's a great sign. And there are good examples of that. In one way that's happening, and again, it's something that's happening, but something we can do better on, is part of the reinvestment. The idea around these reinvestment dollars is to get them to flow into communities, and one way they can do that is to flow to, private, generally nonprofit, but not always, entities that are performing various services, programs, etc. And so that's one direct way that the state is funneling resources to private entities to fill gaps, address needs, risk factors, etc., that we can point to. But again, I think we can do a better job of that. There are still many unmet needs and unfilled gaps in the system. And I think communities truly sitting down and working together, having those conversations, and then leveraging state dollars if available, which they are for this, it is kind of like the ultimate sign that things are working, because that, when public and private are working together, like I said, everybody's getting involved, and that's what we need. Even though one stable adult can really make the difference in a young person's life, right? It does take a community to truly raise people up. And so I don't know if that's a very specific answer to this question, but yeah, and I know there are some good things happening in Wichita, and some good things that aren't yet getting funding in Wichita that we would like to see. And so maybe Tyler can touch on some of that as well.
Yeah, Tyler, when you raised your eyebrows and Mike said that we were going to talk about this for an hour, you were like, I bet he is, but I don't know if I am. But I know you have some really good stuff to chat about there, and it is really great information.
Yeah, so going along with what Mike was talking about, there's definitely a lot of opportunities for funding. There's, with the 367 funds, there's some weird language, some red tape that we could, easily modify, change, or build onto to allow for more local groups and local organizations to receive better access to that funding. Yeah, I really don't have a lot more to add, honestly. Like I said, there's a lot of funding. We're just getting the communications part out, getting the people in the know of what's going on. It seems like that's mainly the issue. So.
Awesome, that's super helpful. I have a couple other questions that are coming in. This one, Carol, I think this is a great question that sometimes we skip over. It's like, what are the places that our youth are kind of entering into the criminal justice system? So what does this, and I think it's a question that sometimes we just think, oh, we all know the answer, but unless you really know a lot about the youth criminal justice system, you might not know. So what are areas that we can support our youth so that way they're not entering the criminal justice system through those pathways?
Yeah. So in terms, when you look at crimes for young people, obviously they do run the whole spectrum. But what you'll notice right away is that the vast majority are misdemeanors, are lesser level offenses. That's why when you saw the reform effort of 2016 kind of ramp up and kick into effect, you saw the number of kids in our youth prison dramatically decline, because we stopped incarcerating kids for misdemeanor offenses, which just kind of makes sense. But there's a lot of misdemeanor offenses, so you're going to have thefts, you're going to have property damage, things like that. You are going to have more serious stuff as well in the mix, but I would say, assaults, fights, interactions like that are a big one of the more serious side. Of course, there's always going to be a few, related to even more serious offenses, attempted homicide, stuff like that. If there's weapons involved, those charges can get really serious as well. But mostly misdemeanors in the system, I think we've done a good job of making sure that at the very least, the kids that are at the deepest end of the system are the ones that are convicted of felonies. Again, as I've been saying all night, we can still do better for those kids too, but I think that's what we'll see. And I think there was more to your question that you kind of tacked on to the one that's on the screen.
I did a little bit of like what ways that we can just help those kids, help to maybe prevent those kiddos entering this. I say kiddos, sorry, I'm a pediatric optometrist at, full time. So I say kiddos too frequently. So our youth, they're not kiddos, they are young adults. So in our youth, how can we help them maybe not enter the system into those ways? What ways can we assist in our community in that way?
Tyler, do you want to take a cut at that one?
So we've had several conversations with youth in the past, having visioning sessions, talking about what you feel that they need. It feels like a lot of these crimes stem from boredom. Not really a lot of activities, not a lot of things for youth to do, access to those activities. And so just keeping youth busy, keeping them, in focus with school, sports programs, helping get them active, get some of that burnt off energy out.
My mom did always tell me, she said when we were at home, she goes, you get in less trouble with me that the busier that you are doing something else. And she, I was like, she's like, you can't annoy me much when you are busy. And for us, it was like cleaning the bathroom and doing like the things that we needed to do. But she was like, or even if you're busy outside of this, you're hanging out with people that are enriching your life, doing those things, and being able to challenge you and so that you can grow as a person. She's like, you're not in a space where you can bother your parents, or she's like, or she goes, just do something dumb. It was just a big thing in our household. And I think it just kind of, you reiterated it, is the more that you're invested in yourself and in the people around you and making, staying busy in some of those ways. Because I was like, heck, I don't do, when I sit at home, I find new walls to tear down in my house and like new ways to do furniture. So I was like, I would say, that even means that I need to find some new things to do to keep busy. So a couple other questions have popped up, and I know we've got about 10 minutes left or so. So I've got just a few questions to kind of go through. So one is like, I think this is a good question. Is anyone checking the fidelity of the programs that we have set up for our youth? So do we have any checks within our system?
Yeah, big part of the reforms of 2016 as well was focusing on data and making sure that we are, using evidence-based practice models and tracking programs in a variety of ways to make sure that there is fidelity. And so, yeah, the Department of Corrections administers most of the programs that we've been talking about tonight, and they have fairly rigorous fidelity reporting requirements. In fact, it's actually a conversation about whether finding the right balance there, because not everything can always meet an evidence-based criteria. There's a lot of people that are really positive in terms of their work with young people, but might not be part of an organization or running a program that's specifically evidence-based. And so there is an ongoing conversation, and has been for years now, about what the right fit is there. But I think currently they're probably erring more on the data and fidelity side, and some folks are getting left out of the mix that probably do deserve to get some money for some good programs as well. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of checks on it.
Awesome. Tyler, do you have anything to add there, or any other information? Man, Mike, you're killing it tonight. Tyler's like, got all the answers. All right, well, I have two that are kind of, I have two questions, and we'll just kind of do rapid fire on these last two. So Barbara had another question. It's like, what states have implemented great juvenile justice reform and have demonstrated success? Like, where are we looking to see really great systems in place?
So I know whenever I was doing some research on the different states and the programs that they have implemented, the first two that I started looking at was Colorado and Missouri, looking at their restorative-based practices, the victim offender mediation groups, and what the alternatives to incarceration could look like for youth. A lot of their programs seem very successful in reducing recidivism for youth, which was one of the key things that I felt was definitely necessary when it comes to helping our youth.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can't tell, I was the kid in class that they're like, all right, don't call on him anymore. Yeah, so good. Like, I think one thing I'll flag is different states have different successful parts of the system, right? Missouri has one of the more successful models for regional, small, secure care centers. And that's a really good part. There's a lot left to be desired in a lot of the things that are happening in the Kansas City and St. Louis areas around youth justice, for sure. But their secure care model is really good. If you look at a state like Massachusetts, they've been ahead of the curve since the 70s on this issue. And so you can look at a lot of stuff that they've done. And I've been out there for some conferences and toured some different programs that they have. Really interesting stuff. New York City has some cutting edge, leading the way stuff, but also Connecticut, Maine have done some good stuff as well. It really depends on what aspect of the system you're interested in, as to what states are really leading the way. And then I'll give us a shout out. We are talked about across the country. Every conference I go to, Kansas is held up as a state that was doing not great and really took a dramatic shift and is now trending in the right direction. And so Kansas can look at itself that over the last 5 years, we've made a lot of really positive changes.
That's awesome. I think it's sometimes we forget to celebrate what we have done. We keep looking at the future and see how much better we can become, and forget that we might be paving the way for other people as well. When we say like, okay, who's doing good things? Sometimes we forget we might be the ones doing some of that good stuff. And it's a lot in part because we have great organizations like Appleseed and Progeny that you both are a part of. So tying it back to League of Women Voters, because we're all about voter rights and registration and voter education. How does voter engagement and education impact this issue? So what are ways when our members are like, okay, one way I can assist is helping with voter engagement, voter education, getting people out to the polls. What are ways that we are impacting the youth criminal justice system?
I would just say keeping in the know on reports that we put out. We have a lot of conversations on anything coming up in juvenile justice. And we love to keep the community involved in these conversations. We have multiple times where we send letters to representatives. We send sign-ons. We have calling banks, I think it's what it's called.
Yeah, phone banks.
Yeah,
we'll take it.
So yeah, just the basic stuff, keep in the know, follow the news, make sure you look at the new bills being passed and how it affects your community. Local government is the one that affects you the most.
Right on. That was we will take you to talk about voter engagement any day of the week. That was perfect.
For sure. I mean, just to piggyback on that, like we've kind of talked about today, every local office has an impact here, right? Municipal rules impact youth justice. Your county commission has a huge role in the youth justice system because all of those dollars we've talked about, reinvestment dollars, they all flow through counties. That's how they're administered. So your county commissioners, vitally important. Each judicial district has a juvenile corrections advisory board. Those are the groups that actually make the local decisions to request those dollars. Get involved with them, figure out who's on them, have conversations with them, do it today. It's a big part. And so, yeah, county commissions are a big deal. And then, of course, district attorneys, sheriffs, those are all folks in a lot of places that are elected, and getting involved in those efforts make a big deal. And then the Board of Education as well. Electing school board members that really want kids to be safe in school, but understand that does not mean that armed policemen roaming the hallways is the way to do it. There's a lot of ways to keep kids safe, and part of that is making sure that schools are policing themselves, and that the police don't have to be the ones policing the schools. And I think restorative practices come into play there. When you really create a restorative environment in a school building, that becomes its own, society where everybody's holding each other accountable and lifting each other up. So there's a lot of stuff that can happen at the local level that's super important.
Well, I just want to say thank you both for all the things that you shared with us today, and all of the things that you have brought to our attention to be able to understand juvenile criminal justice and youth criminal justice even better, so that we can be more educated as a society as well as a group of people. And so that way we can just really become really big advocates for our youth. So I appreciate you both for being here. And then if you have any questions or anything at all, we have put both of their organizations, those websites there. They both have ways on the websites to contact them and to get more involved. So if you are interested in becoming more involved here. So I'm going to thank you both so much. I'm going to give a couple little things to wrap up. And so we'll be able to so we'll close up the evening. I wanted to give you a reminder again about our wine tasting fundraiser that is coming up on December 17th at 7 p.m. It's going to be at the Old Cowtown Museum. So feel free to go onto our Facebook page to be able to purchase your tickets there. If you also have any sort of interest in joining the League of Women Voters, Wichita Metro, earlier in the comments, you'll see ways to join. This is going to be a great way for you to become more involved as we are continually doing great efforts for voter rights and registration, as well as voter education. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you on December 17th and then back again in January for regularly scheduled unit meetings. Thank you so much and have a great evening.